so that can we begin to then have a more compassionate relationship with the I, the wrong use of the I that's getting in the way all the time. That it's not a civil war. It's not an outside guy trying to fix the inside place. No, it's the surrender of the outside doer into the felt experience of standing in front of the invisible Lord.
Welcome to Healing at the Edge, a podcast featuring interviews, archive talks, and teachings on conscious living, conscious dying with RamDev Dale Borglum, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. Dale has been a meditation teacher for nearly 50 years and has been at the bedside of the dying and their loved ones for over 40 years. He was the director of the Hanuman Foundation and founded the first Center for Conscious Dying in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's taught with Stephen Levine, Ram Dass, and countless others on the spiritual path. Dale is still working with the dying today. For more information, please visit livingdying.org.
But today I would like to talk about bringing the mind into the heart. In our last two get-togethers, 2 times ago, I talked about opening the heart. And last time I talked about Maharaji's teachings, which are certainly heart-based teachings. I, in 2009, began teaching ongoing groups as a way of supporting myself. I'd been a yogi all my life. I'd really never had a job. My son is very impressed that I got this far in life without ever having a regular job. But at a certain point, when I lost all my money with Madoff, I needed to get a job. And I started teaching these small ongoing groups. There are people in the groups from the very beginning, 15 years ago. And in these groups, I talk about, and we explore together in a very intimate way. There's small groups, maximum size 10 people. These qualities of being grounded, being centered, opening your heart, compassion, tantra, non-duality, service, the things we've been talking about in this group. And I've been noticing how difficult it is for many people, and remembering how difficult it was for me for a long time to really, after understanding these concepts, to be able to live them in an ongoing moment-to-moment way, to be centered when difficult emotions are happening, to keep the heart open when it's a really bunch of boring moments in a row in your life. And the more I thought about it, I really felt like in some way I haven't done a very good job of presenting these notions. And when I look around, I don't think a lot of other people have either. That there's a kind of way of talking about the Dharma that's looking at it from the outside in, of here's something to do for your ego to do this activity, and you'll maybe probably eventually become a better person. In other words, let's begin with talking about the notion of being centered, of inhabiting the lower belly, the hara. Very often, we approach that from the standpoint of, I am going to pay attention to my energy center down in the lower belly. And this maybe is the way to begin. This probably is the most obvious starting point, but it really is not based in an understanding of what being centered really is. It's based on the delusion that there is an I who's doing this. So today I'd like to talk about, first of all, learning to be centered, which creates enough self-esteem and sense of empowerment that we can then bear the vulnerability of the open heart and then talk about this quality of bringing the open heart into daily activity. And there are two books that I've read in my life that I'm going to be referring a little bit to today. I mentioned them in the chat. There's a book called Hara, The Vital Center of Man, about being centered. And there's a book called The Art of Prayer, an Orthodox anthology about Christian prayer. Both of these books are very inexpensively offered on Amazon if you'd like to buy them. As I say, these are two of the few books that really have changed my life. I'm not really too much into reading books anymore, but if you are, these are ones that I highly recommend. So once again, then, particularly with this quality of bringing the mind into the heart, this is one of the core principles in prayer in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, that we learn to bring the mind into the heart, as opposed to I am paying attention to the heart. And we will explore the difference between those two viewpoints. There are two reasons why it's difficult to do that. The first reason is that people try to do this objectively rather than subjectively. I am paying attention to my heart. I am paying attention to my center, with some kind of notion that there is an energetic center in the body, in the belly, in the heart, that we can actually pay attention to. The word energy has a Greek origin that has no analog in Oriental languages, Asian languages, so that this false notion that there are energetic centers in the body, which I think is a real misconstruing of what the chakras actually are, leads to a real difficulty in being centered rather than doing centering exercises, or being heartfelt rather than trying to pay attention to the heart. And I would guess that everybody in this room has experienced a great deal of frustration in your life in trying to be open-hearted. That you read all these great poems by Rumi and Hafiz, and you think about Maharaji and all these fantastic quotes, and you've got pictures of these wonderful deities and saints in books and plastered on your wall, and if you have an altar, on your altar, and you have the best of intentions, and you've had experiences. I have had experiences of being so much in love with God that I'm rendered helpless in terms of doing anything in the world for short periods of time. But how often are we able to go through just a moderate chunk of the day with a really open heart, when we're reacting with other people who turn out to have personalities, when we're reacting to technical devices that are always having problems, when we're reacting to call centers? The physical body is usually perceived externally or objectively from the outside. What we're exploring today is the felt body, the body of presence that we are aware of subjectively from within. It's not a body of subtle energetic flows that we feel or become aware of, but a felt body of awareness as such. And we're being asked then in a certain way to surrender beyond I am objectively in relationship to my body and my feelings and things like that, to subjectively dropping into this felt sense of presence and aliveness and pure awareness. We live in a very dualistic culture dominated by conflicts between the head and the heart. right? And there's so much that can be going on in the head. We look at the news, we look at our relationships, we look at what's going on in the climate with things far, with things near. And it, there is an incredible momentum behind separating from that, having it be an objective experience, an objective experience. And when I was around Maharaji, one of the things that was hard to really understand at the time, not sure I understand it yet, but there was some quality in him that he did not have an objective relationship with the world. One time, we were all across the courtyard from Maharaji. He had been in a room, door closed, doing whatever he was doing, and the guy there said, "Hey, you can come and see Maharaji now." So we all went running across the courtyard, almost like a race to get in the door. And I was the first person in the door because I happened to be right across. I had the shortest path to darshan. And as I came in the door, it was almost like I surprised him, which is kind of ridiculous, of course. He knew everything, but he was off in some immensity, and he turned and he looked at me, and there was absolutely nobody there. I mean, sometimes he would be very loving and, "Oh, I'm the perfect grandpa and I love you so much." But it was somewhere between totally terrifying and completely comforting that he was that immense, that it was the guru in the big form. Even though there was a body there, he was everything. Okay. So the little I reigns supreme in the head. And this quality first of being centered, which we're going to explore, is what allows us to then go into the heart, which is in a lot of traditions the seat of the soul, if you will. Uh, so dropping down into the lower belly is the first step in subjectively going beyond this objective way of there's an I who's taking care of things, who's doing things. It's transcending the I and realizing in some sense that there's this surrender into wholeness, surrender into being the whole universe. So just imagine we're doing a breathing practice of being centered. And the first step is what everybody does is I'm paying attention to my belly. There's movement, the belly's going in and out as I'm breathing in and out. And maybe you spend a few years doing that, so the mind starts calming down. And then the second stage of practice begins to arise, in which we begin to see in our relationship with the breath, in our work with dropping into centeredness, we begin to see the wrong use of the I, that there is somebody who's trying to do this that really doesn't exist and is creating this rigidity, this trying, this efforting, this tension that is preventing the surrender into being there. And this is a very rich, important, yet incredibly challenging stage of practice in surrender, of beginning to admit that you can't heal yourself. It's the first step in the 12 steps. Here we're not doing the 12 steps. We're doing meditation practice. But this step then of seeing, I'm trying to be more centered. I'm trying to drop down, realizing that you can't do that, that the you who's trying is really the problem, not the solution. So when we are able to see how this becoming rigid, holding on to, here's what I know, here's where I am, here's where I think I need to get to. I'm going to try to do this. I'm getting better. My mind's getting calmer. Look at how I'm doing. And even when those thoughts get very, very subtle, I remember being at a retreat where I had been meditating for days and days and days. There was almost no thought at all. And the first thought that arose was, you're doing pretty good now. And then there was a thought, I judged myself, oh, you're even doing that. So that there was even levels upon levels of the I who was feeling, because of some delusion of inadequacy, that I needed to be a different person. That we try to find secure positions from which to experience reality. We try to find, here's what I know. I've read these books. I've done these teachings. I've understood these things. It makes a lot of sense. I get it. Now I got to do it. And we have to begin there. But in the second stage of practice, we're seeing how the I is creating the problem, that the I is a delusion, and it's preventing us from eventually resting in the heart. And yet, as practice deepens, we often try harder. We entrench the I, we rigidify the I, we strengthen the I. The final stage of practice, when we're really able to begin to be with the malformation of the I, is beginning to see that even the breath is an expression of pure presence, of wholeness. Okay, so in watching the breath, hara breathing, dropping down into the belly, being centered, you'll probably begin to notice that at the end of the out breath, it's difficult to completely let go at the end. There's a subtle holding on, because the end of the out breath is like a death. And at the beginning of the in breath, it's hard to let that happen completely naturally, because that's rebirth and I want to be reborn. So the illusory I, has a hard time. The conditioning makes it difficult to completely let go of the out breath and to let the in breath happen in a very natural way. And to begin to work with that in a very precise way, in a very merciful way, of watching how this I keeps wanting not to die, I'm holding on to the breath. I'm holding on to who I think I am. And as long as we're doing that, as long as we're not centered, it's really apparent that it's going to be virtually impossible to rest in the heart, because we're feeling inadequate. We're feeling, I need to get somewhere. There's not enough self-esteem to surrender into the boundless spaciousness of the heart. Here's a quote from the book Hara, which I put in the chat function. Practice is nothing but work towards illuminating that power which separates man from life. It means the adventure of opening himself without fear, of hearing and heeding all the signs through which being speaks to him. At the beginning and end of all practice stands the rerouting of the conscious life in that center which epitomizes the original oneness. So this is very challenging work. It's why it's difficult. It's why it's difficult to do it subjectively rather than objectively. As long as it's objective, there's this I who thinks they're doing it. So how do we really find the motivation to be willing to die into the present? We need, first of all, to feel that the present form of life caught in the I is unsatisfactory, and that there's some deep wish for inner growth, that you begin to feel, I begin to feel the constriction of being caught in this rigid notion of who I am. And I've had glimpses both in my own being and being around saints and being around other people of there is this other way to live. And then can one make a total commitment? I mean, being centered, this subjective quality of surrender into centeredness is a very straightforward idea, but it involves ego death. One of my teachers said that for 2 years, his only practice was being centered, whether he was watching television or eating dinner or being with his wife or going to sleep at night. He was working with being in the hara. He was exploring the possibility of, do I have enough trust? Do I have enough faith that I can drop into the belly and trust that this beingness will flow through me? That the energy of the universe, the chi, the Shakti will flow through me and life will be accomplished. My purpose will be accomplished. So that we're learning to exercise not our breath, not our body, but our self, finding out what our self actually is. And the reason I'm saying these things, and we will explore this in a guided meditation in a bit, is because this is the prelude to doing the same thing in the heart. I've talked before some about subjectively getting grounded, subjectively being centered, but I really haven't thought about so much this subjective quality of being in the heart. And it just really occurred to me in this last week that the same notion of dropping into the belly as a subjective quality can be applied here to the heart. And it's really exactly what they talk about in Orthodox Christianity. There's the main teaching is saying a repetitive prayer, the Jesus prayer, but it can be any prayer. It doesn't have to be a Christian notion here at all, of course, with the mind united with the heart. So as long as we're trying to be in the heart, I go to kirtans. This friend Jai Utal, who Natalie was mentioning, is going to be at this event we're doing in Taos together. He lives a couple miles away from me here, and he and I both go to this local yoga studio, Padma Studio. He does singing events. I do talking, meditating events. And I go and I sing with Jai, and my heart really opens. And there's almost always a time when I feel deep love interspersed with times where I'm bored, where my mind is wandering. I'm feeling, we're singing to God and I'm thinking about sports. I'm thinking about the Living Dying Project. I'm thinking about, anything other than that, because once again, it's about surrender. And this quality then of uniting the mind with the heart, that as long as we're trying to be devotional from the outside as an objective experience, it's always going to be a struggle. It's always going to be a struggle because there's so much momentum behind the identification with separateness. Okay, so can we have being in the heart, this felt experience, this subjective experience? Here is a quote from this guy, Theophane the Recluse. He's a Syrian mystic who talked a lot about having the mind in the heart. He is the main author of a lot of the quotes in that book, The Art of Prayer. And I will put this quote by him in the chat function at a certain point, but not right now. Okay. To stand with the mind in the heart, or to descend from the head into the heart, are the same thing. And the core of this work lies in the concentration of felt attention and the standing before the invisible Lord, not in the head, but within the chest, close to the heart and in the heart. When the divine warmth comes, all this will be clear. So he's not saying about paying attention to the heart, or there's a heart center we're going to pay attention to. Ramana Maharshi talks about the same thing, that the seat of the soul is in the heart, it's in the chest. But he said it's not about paying attention to the heart. It's not about I am paying attention to sensations in my chest. It's dropping into subjectively being in the seat of consciousness, being in the heart, felt attention. So just as the way we were talking before about those different stages of working with dropping into the belly through working with the breath, same thing can happen with the heart. Maybe in the beginning, you pay attention to the heart. You breathe into the heart, you breathe out loving kindness, you breathe out compassion. We do Tonglen practice, we do compassionate practice, compassionate abiding or other compassion practices. Great. It's a great place to begin. But I think many people get stuck there and they get very frustrated that I'm trying to do compassion practice. I'm trying to do devotional practice. And my mind keeps interrupting. It says, no, let's do this other thing. So that can we begin to then have a more compassionate relationship with the I, the wrong use of the I that's getting in the way all the time. That it's not a civil war. It's not an outside guy trying to fix the inside place. No, it's the surrender of the outside doer into the felt experience of standing in front of the invisible Lord. Now, maybe the invisible Lord is a kind of a tricky phrase for you. Maybe that sounds too Christian or too theistic or whatever. Use your own words. I don't care. But all of the teachings, all those Maharaji quotes I gave 2 weeks ago, were essentially him saying, it's all God. I mean, he would say things like, the best form to worship God is every form. How are you going to do that? How are you going to worship every form when one of the forms is Donald Trump, another form is Joe Biden, another form is Putin, or all these people who are screwing up the world, right? Who are so power hungry that you can't trust the thing they're doing most of the time. When Maharaji was asked, what is the best way to meditate? He said, see God in everyone. Well, how do you go from having a busy mind to seeing God in everyone? I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's a very big leap. See God in everyone. And you can only do that when there's not an I judging everything that's going on. He said, one can obtain a pure mind by one-pointedness and detachment. Meditate on one point and you will know God. What is this one point? It's this surrender into beingness, right? So that being in the heart, different stages, different levels, paying attention to the heart, seeing how the I is getting in the way, but then finding the faith to die into the heart, to keep realizing that right in front of you, whatever the person is, whatever the experience is, whatever you're seeing on the computer screen, it is that. It is that. Maharaji said, it is better to see God in everything than to try to figure it out. There's a hint there to what it is we're talking about today, right? Usually we're approaching devotion as a way of trying to become a better person, a more loving person. What he's saying is so simple, so immediate that it's difficult to see God in everything. If you love God, you overcome all impurities rather than I've got to deal with my impurities. That right in front of you, right now in this moment, all around you and inside of you and everywhere is the object of devotion, is the open heart, which is going to be unavailable if you're not centered enough, having dealt with fear, guilt, shame, inadequacy, grandiosity, that will then prevent this surrender into wholeness. So that it's basically some switch from this objective way of experiencing reality to the felt sense, the feeling awareness, the felt sense of pure awareness moment to moment, whether you call that the invisible God or pure presence. And even using then devotional practices as a way of realizing non-duality, wholeness. Here's another quote from The Art of Prayer. During prayer, it is essential that the spirit should be united with the mind, and that they should recite the prayer together. But whereas the mind works with words uttered either mentally or aloud, the spirit acts through the feeling of warm tenderness or tears. Union of the two is given in due course by divine grace. But for the beginner, it is enough if the spirit sympathizes and cooperates with the mind. Okay. So, and let me read I don't know if it's a poem exactly, but where did it go? A paragraph by Thomas Merton. He says, "Now you ask about my method of meditation. Simply speaking, I have a very simple way of prayer. It is centered entirely on the presence of God and to his will and to his love. That is to say, it is centered on faith by which alone we can know the presence of God. One might say that this gives my meditation the character as being before God as if you saw him. But it does not mean imagining anything or conceiving a precise image of God. To my mind, this would be a form of idolatry. On the contrary, it is a manner of adoring him as all. There is in my heart this great thirst to recognize the nothingness and silence. If I am present myself, I recognize this as an obstacle. If he wills, he can then make the nothingness into total clarity. If he does not will, then the nothingness seems to itself be an object, remains an obstacle. Such is my ordinary way of prayer. It is not thinking about anything, but the direct seeking of the face of the invisible, which cannot be found unless we are lost in him who is invisible." And then finally, Ramana Maharshi, who said that the seat of the soul is in the heart. He says it's on the right side of the chest. Some people say it's in the center, some people on the left, different traditions. But he ends up saying that the heart is not a physical organ, it's the spiritual center of consciousness, but it's not any physical location. It's a felt sense. It's a quality of surrender. The absolute truth cannot be realized through the domain of the mind, but only through the heart. The primary contraction is believing that things are solid and independent. We don't see that we don't see. This contraction is so constant we don't feel it. True spirituality is not about feeling good, but about being real. Being real is this felt sense, trusting the felt sense, not fixing anything, trusting who we are. So in my practice, since I've been putting this talk together, I've been focusing more on standing before the invisible, this sense of I can completely trust this moment. It's a felt sense of total adequacy, total connectedness, trusting spaciousness. It's a feeling we all know. And sometimes as I'm doing that, feeling it, opening to it, I was not really doing it. It wasn't the right word. My eye comes up and there's a battle, there's uh, historical material that isn't ready to surrender in that moment. And can I take a step back then and I'm having compassion for that. I'm having mercy for that. It's until you're ready to live there like Maharaji was living there, like Christ was living there, then it is a process. It is a process of being real more and more and more. It's not about being happy. It's not about being better. It's what is the reality of this moment? Is there an I who thinks it's in charge, or can we surrender beyond that? Thank you very much.